Genesis and the Secrets of Creation, Part 2. The human being in relation to the animal kingdom. So in Part 1, we finished looking at the opening verses of Genesis and relating it to how the earth goes through the three prior rounds of Saturn, Sun, and Moon stages before densifying or physicalizing into the modern Earth that we have today. And the reason it's important to learn about these very ancient epochs of time is because, as we'll see, all things in relation to like evolution of species and of the human organism, all things fit very quite nicely into this paradigm and start to make a lot more sense, especially when contrasted with the old mechanistic Darwinist materialist view of things, which never made any sense. So to start with, we see a contradiction in the Bible in Genesis chapter 1 and 2, where in chapter 1, with the opening 7 days of creation, it appears that the animals came before humans. And then in chapter 2, it says that, so after Adam and Eve were already made, God then created the birds of the air and the fish of the sea and the beasts of the field, and brought them to Adam to name. So why would this occur if the animals were already made? So we're going to address this contradiction in the video here. So first thing to understand, and again this is how I left with the last video, is that the Earth, in our fourth phase or round of Earth, it goes through what's called a recapitulation or a repetition of earlier stages, although in a much shorter time frame. So the first Earth round was Polarian epoch, which was a repetition of the Saturn stage, and then Hyperborea, it was a repetition of the Sun stage, and then Lemuria was a repetition of the Old Moon stage. And so these repetitions are the days of creation, where we get the plants and then the animals. Well, first we get the light, the day and night, which is the Saturn stage. And so what's happening here is that none of these things are taking place in the physical realm, but are actually taking place in the astral realm, the spiritual world. And human beings are going through these various phases. They're not densified yet into physical bodies, as we would see today. But there was a time where we were experiencing in the spiritual world what it's like to be all the different plants and animals. And this is the key point. We're not evolved from animals like the Darwinists say. It's not that we were once physical monkeys walking around on Earth. That's a misunderstanding. The human form was always, the blueprint for the human form has been around since the beginning. But in order to prepare to take on the human form, we had to go through more simpler forms. And so, as we'll see, what we see as the actual animals today, they were once like us. They were once souls that were preparing to be human, but they simply fell too soon into matter. They were captivated by the animal form, and so much so that they forgot to wait. They forgot to wait to be human, even though it was informed to us by higher beings that the human form contains all the animal forms within our astral body. But they forgot that, and so that's why the word animal means bad spirit. Animus is spirit, and mal means bad. It's not a moral judgment against them, but it is pointing us to the fact that they were a bit premature. They couldn't wait long enough, and they fell too soon because of the enticements of matter. It's literally like the bird spirit was like, I love being a bird. I love flying and catching mice. I'm going to do that. And so it did. And that's what it's doing up until this day. But before that, that bird spirit was just like us. It was potentially going to be a human being. And so with that, let's read from Steiner. This is from the Apocalypse of St. John, his series of lectures. Let us look back to the origin of our Earth after Saturn, Sun, and Moon, and a long interval had passed. The Earth then emerged anew out of the cosmic darkness. At that time, in the first part of the Earth development, there were no other creatures upon the Earth besides man. He is the firstborn. He was entirely spiritual, for embodiment consists in a densification. Let us imagine a body of water suspended in space, which, through a certain process, partially crystallizes into ice. First a small part, and then the same process continually repeated. And now let us imagine that the small pieces of ice which have crystallized fall from the body of water, so that they are now separated from the whole mass. Now, because each small piece of ice can only grow larger so long as it is in the whole body of water, when it has separated from this, it remains at the same stage. Let us imagine a portion of the body of water separated in the form of very small pieces of ice. Let us imagine that the freezing of the water continues, and at the next stage more water assumes the form of small lumps of ice. These again fall out, and so on, till finally a very large part is crystallized out of the mass of water and takes the shape of ice. This last has taken the most out of the mother substance of the water. It has been able to wait the longest before separating. It is the same in evolution. The lowest animals were unable to wait. They left their spiritual mother substance too early, and hence have remained behind at an earlier stage of evolution. Thus, the gradually ascending grades of lower beings represent backward stages in evolution. Man waited until the last. He was the last to leave his spiritual divine mother substance and descend as dense substance into fleshly form. The animals descended earlier, and therefore remained at that stage. We shall see the reason for this later. At present, we are interested in the fact that they descended and have remained at an earlier stage of evolution. What, therefore, is an animal form? It is one which, had it remained united with the spirit from which it proceeded, would have developed up to our present humanity. But the animal forms have remained at a standstill. They have left the spiritual germ. They have separated themselves and are now degenerating. They represent a branch of the great tree of humanity. In ancient times, man had the various animal natures within him, as it were, but then separated them off one after another as side branches. All the animals in their different forms represent nothing else than human passions which condensed too early. That which man still possesses spiritually in his astral body, the several animal forms represent physically. He kept this in the astral body until the latest period of Earth existence, and hence he could progress the furthest. Now man still has something within him which must separate itself from the universal evolution as a descending branch, as the other animal forms have done. That which man has within him as a tendency to good and evil, to cleverness and stupidity, to beauty and ugliness, represents the possibility of an upward progress or a remaining behind. Just as the animal form has developed out of the progressing humanity, so will the race of evil with the horrible faces develop out of it as it progresses towards spirituality and reaches the later goal of humanity. In the future, there will not only be the animal forms, which are the incarnated images of human passions, but there will also be a race in which will live what man now hides within him as a portion of evil, which today he can still conceal, but which later will be manifest. We must understand that this separation of the animal forms was actually necessary to man. Each animal form which separated in bygone times from the general stream signifies that man had then progressed a step further. Imagine that all the qualities distributed throughout the animal kingdom were in man. He has purified himself from them. Through this he was able to develop higher. If we take a muddy liquid and allow the gross matter in it to settle to the bottom, the finer part remains at the top. In the same way, the grosser parts which man would have been unable to use for his present condition of development have been deposited in the various animal forms. Through man having cast out of his line of development these animal forms, his elder brothers as it were, he has reached his present height. Humanity has risen by throwing out the lower forms in order to purify itself, and it will rise still higher by separating another kingdom of nature, the kingdom of the evil race. Thus mankind rises upward. Man owes every quality he now possesses to the circumstance that he has rejected a particular animal form. One who with spiritual vision looks upon the various animals knows exactly what we owe to them. We look upon the lion form and say, if the lion did not exist in the outer world, man would not have had this or that quality. For through his having rejected it, he has acquired this or that quality. This is the case too with all other forms in the animal kingdom. End quote. On the group souls of animals. So each spirit being that could have become a single human being, had they waited, but instead they descended too early through the enticements of a particular animal form, became that entire species of animal. So, for example, the being that was enticed by the lion form became all the lions. It became the group soul for each individual lion. Same with every other higher animal. So the being that was so enticed by the idea of flying, for example, became the hawk. They wanted to fly and catch mice and all the joys and ecstasies of that life. And they forgot their goal or plan to be a human being. As one example. Same with every other animal. This is how we must view what a species is. The group soul of that particular species becomes segregated and split into the many, quote, individual members that we see before us. Each animal has its own physical body, etheric body, and astral body, but shares its I with all the other members of its species. Thus there is one I or spirit entity behind the dog, one I behind the cat, the zebra, the giraffe, and so on, all the way down to the fish level. Then, at the vertebrate and invertebrate distinction, a line is drawn, and the simpler creatures below that line, like the insects, are actually from the plant kingdom originally and evolving upwards out of the plants. Or elsewhere, Steiner actually says that the invertebrates are the sense organs for the soul or the mind of the planet itself. So thus the animal kingdom is an amalgamation coming from two directions, from the human kingdom down and from the plant and earth kingdoms up. And modern science is right in marking this important branching point at the vertebrate and invertebrate line. You can see that the fact that the spinal cord is shaped like the letter I shows you that there's an I individual there, whereas the invertebrates don't have that in the spinal cord, that I shape. They're not individualized. So each dog, for example, shares this soul link with all other dogs. It's the same being. And if you could see into the supersensible world, you would see thin astral threads connecting all dogs to each other, all cats to each other, and so on. They are like fingers of the same hand. They are parts of a whole that we don't see because the whole exists in a higher world. The being that is the dog spirit or oversoul of that species is behind the mirror, poking its fingers through the mirror. And we just see the fingers, which are the individual dogs, and we mistakenly think each finger is a separate being, not seeing that they are all connected to the same hand, which is connected to the same body. Knowing this now, when I take my dog on a walk and he runs into another dog, and the two get excited to see each other, I think about how I am witness to two astral forms of the same I spirit reuniting. It's really quite beautiful. The only comparison I can make, which still doesn't do it justice, is like a schizophrenic mind becoming whole again for a moment. The spirit entity or oversoul behind each animal is actually quite clever and smart, and apparently they will talk to you if you're clairvoyant enough. They'll talk to the clairvoyant in your language, and you can converse with dog or cat. You converse with each of them as though you are conversing with another human being. But because their soul gets spread out like a fine mist, it gets diffused into all the millions, if not billions, of individual members of that species. It's too diffuse to keep that intelligence, and so each individual member is fairly simple, psychologically speaking. So their intelligence lies not with the individual, but with the group.